Well, good evening, this is Houndog Steve wishing you a very pleasant evening. And Brexit, here we come. The articles of Brexit have now been ratified and voted on and passed in the House of Parliament under the Conservative government, and the next step will be the final vote. This is when the MEPs will finally leave the EU for the very last time. This vote takes place on the 29th of January. Now, I was surprised to find out that the EU in Brussels can actually reject the Article 50 and go against Brexit. However, I don't think that is going to happen. I think this is just going to be a rubber stamp kind of affair. However, even once this has happened, we're going to go into a negotiation period till December 31st of 2020, and already Macron and the negotiators are saying it's not enough time, they want an extension, and so on and so forth. But Boris Johnson has said there will be absolutely no extension to this negotiation period. And Boris Johnson has opened up the hard Brexit preparations. And I don't know if you remember, but in my New Year's predictions, I said that the EU would be so difficult to negotiate with that we would end up with a hard exit from the EU. And this again from the Express. Macron's Brexit bloc. France says EU has no intention of agreeing to December 2020 deadline. France has warned it is prepared to ignore Boris Johnson's deadline to conclude a trade agreement with Brussels and drag out negotiations beyond December 2020. Said the 11-month timetable set by the Prime Minister is only achievable if the UK signs up to the bloc's rulebook. Oh yeah, okay, we'll just follow your rulebook. She said Paris is not willing to make sacrifices for the sake of having a trade deal between the UK and the EU ready by the end of the Brexit transition period, suggesting talks could run until at least June next year. The more reasonable the demands of the UK are, the more reasonable we can agree on such a time frame, Mr Monchalin told a Politico website. It will now depend on how the EU presents its negotiation strategy and objectives. She said the further Mr Johnson seeks to distance the UK from Brussels rules and regulations, the longer the bloc will attempt to drag talks out. Mr Johnson has ruled out extending Britain's transition period beyond December 31st if a deal on the future relationship between the UK and the EU has not been agreed. But Mr Monchalin vowed not to be rushed into striking an accord with the UK despite the emergence of a new no-deal cliff edge. She said we are not ready to sacrifice the content, quality and seriousness of an agreement so that we can put ourselves in a straitjacket of a too tight calendar. By signing an agreement, we will start a long journey. If we need 6 months more, it's worth taking them. Paris will tell Brussels negotiator Michel Barnier that reciprocity between the UK and the EU must be at the heart of any future agreement. As soon as we put ourselves under the same constraint, that's a great way to create reciprocity, Mr Monchalin said. Reciprocity? You see the nonsense? See the crap you have to put up with these people? Oh yes, we're going to drag our feet. And so, as I said, we're heading for a hard exit. Trust me. But this is going to be an interesting period because, Britain will still be under the governance of the EU, all of their regulations and all of their pronouncements, but they won't have any representation in the EU. So it will be very, very interesting to see whether Britain decides to comply with these regulations. Once they're out of the EU, I think that the EU's jurisdiction over Britain could be quite limited. And whether they will take, Britain to an international court to settle any kind of issues, or whether Britain will just outright say, well, we're under World Trade Organization rules, which is what they are anyways, and we're going to operate under those rules and let the cards fall where they may. But again from the Express, EU chaos, Brexit marks beginning of the end as EU already heading down dangerous road. British MEPs attend a final plenary session in Strasbourg this week ahead of the UK's exit from the trade bloc on January the 31st. British MEPs attended the final plenary session in Strasbourg this week ahead of the UK's exit from the trade bloc on January 31st. Upon leaving the EU, the UK will be able to sign a host of trade deals with countries across the world, which the former Brexit Party MEP warned could spell the end for Brussels. Speaking Express.co.uk, Mr Foreman predicted a bleak future for the EU as he predicted several other countries will follow the UK's lead in deciding to vote for independence from the Brussels bloc. He said it's the beginning of the end for the EU. You can't have a one-size-fits-all for so many countries. Eventually the imbalance within the bloc is always going to lead to chaos. The EU is going down a very dangerous road over the next few years. Mr Foreman first became an MEP as a member of the Brexit Party, but shortly before the general election, he and some other colleagues urged Britons to back Boris Johnson. In the light of the UK's departure, Hungary, Poland and Italy have all voiced concerns over the structure of the EU. In what Mr Foreman warned was growing Euroscepticism, the MEP insisted all three countries could eventually leave the trade bloc and carry out their own versions of Brexit. Both Hungary and Poland are currently under Article 7 proceedings. Under Article 7, the EU as an institution can suspend a member of any state amid threats to the bloc's core values. Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban has been long accused of cracking down on the freedom of the press. As a result of a vote in the EU Parliament which called for a resolution to act on the current state in Hungary, Mr Orban admitted his party was close to leaving the European People's Party, EPP, the largest group in the Parliament. Earlier this month, Mr Orban also threatened to create a new party in combination with Italy's League Party and Poland's Law and Justice Party, PIS. Mr Orban said, "We are not interested in the EPP as it is today. We are interested in the future EPP, and the future EPP should be different. If EPP is unable to change itself in another direction, I think in the future European politics will need a new European initiative, which is a Christian Democrat. If we cannot reach a change inside EPP, we will initiate something new in European politics." In Poland's case, the ruling Law and Justice Party defied Brussels by passing a law punishing judges who are critical of court reforms. The ruling bans judges from attending protests or referring questions to EU courts. As a consequence of the new legislation, the country's Supreme Court warned the country may have to leave the EU over the reform. Similar to Hungary, the country has not yet realigned with EU Parliament's core values, which stated the situation in both Poland and Hungary has deteriorated since the imposition of Article 7. Britain is currently scheduled to leave the European Union on January 31st, 2020, as Prime Minister Boris Johnson aims to secure a trade agreement with the EU by the end of the year. But anyways, I'm very, very excited. I'm very, very pleased to hear that everything is going along smoothly. A little disappointed that Britain is still going to take another year to do these negotiations, and that, of course, all during this time, Britain is going to have to pay billions and billions of pounds to the EU for a dying institution. And of course, it's been said several times now that this is the beginning of the end of the EU. The centralised model just doesn't work, and I think you're going to see Britain is going to thrive. And of course, we're already seeing all of the naysayers. Where are you now? You know, the housing market is up 5% and we're only in the middle of January. The British pound has strengthened and the stock market is up. These are all good signs, and I think it bodes very, very well for the future of Britain outside of the European Union. Okay, if you've enjoyed this video, please like, comment and subscribe below. And in the meantime, this is Hound Dog Steve signing off, wishing you a very pleasant evening, and we'll talk very, very shortly. See you now. Take care. Bye.